Good afternoon. We'll go ahead and call to order the regular meeting for the City of Murfreesboro Board of Zoning Appeals for July 27, 2011. First thing I'd like to do today is to recognize two people that are in attendance here at our meeting that are recently have joined the City of Murfreesboro, specifically in the Codes Department. First of all, Ms. Tara Green. She is a new administrative support specialist in the Codes Department. And also Mr. Kevin Jones. He is our newest Codes Enforcement Officer. So we want to welcome you guys to the Board of Zoning Appeals anyway, and look forward to working with you guys in the future. All right, we'll now consider minutes for the regular meeting on June 22nd, 2011, and also for a special meeting on July 8, 2011. Are those minutes, I believe, were included with our agenda materials. Are there any changes to those minutes? If not, those minutes will stand approved as presented, and we will move on to new business. First, we'll take up variance requests. We have application Z11036 by Mr. John Callow of the City of Murfreesboro Community Development Department. And this is for Mr. and Mrs. Ricky and Melina Wigington, requesting a 10-foot variance of the minimum required 30-foot front setback for principal structures in a residential duplex zone. And this is for property located at 1014 North Maple Street. Mr. Blomley, if you'd review that application for us, please.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers, and good afternoon, Chairman Rogers and members of the Board of Zoning Appeals. Our first item, as you mentioned, is at 1014 North Maple Street. The property is zoned RD residential duplex, and there's an existing single-family residence on the subject property owned by Mr. and Mrs. Wigington. Mr. Callow is the applicant today, however, because this is a proposed rebuild to be done by our Community Development Department. He's had the structure looked at by our Building and Codes Department and found it to be in need of substantial repair to where it's more economical, I believe would probably be the way to describe it, to tear it down and rebuild it rather than to make those repairs. As always, Mr. Callow tries to be sensitive to the existing neighborhoods when he's building in an established older neighborhood. And this is one of those established older neighborhoods where the structures were built much closer to the front property line than the required front setback. And in this case, in the RD zoning district, the required front setback is 30 feet. The existing house is approximately 20 feet from the front property line, and that actually matches the houses on both sides. If we could pull up the aerial photo here. You can see here is Mr. and Mrs. Wigington's house, and it sits approximately even with the other houses on this block. This is, and to kind of orient you a little bit, this is on the east side of North Maple Street, south of Hembry Street, and it's actually directly across the street from the back of the O'Charlie's parking lot that fronts on Memorial Boulevard. And this is a fraternity house just to the south of that O'Charlie's parking lot. You can also see that in addition to the existing single-family structure, there are two large outbuildings on the subject property. All three structures, the two outbuildings and the principal structure of the house, are going to be torn down by Mr. Callow. The only thing that is going to be rebuilt will be the single-family residence upon the subject lot. So as you can see by looking at the aerial photograph, to stay in line with the other structures on this block, the house would need to be built back at approximately the same distance from the road as the existing house is right now. And you'll see here I put up the survey of the property and the plot plan of the proposed residence. As you can see, there is a porch on the front of the house which is slightly over 10 feet into that required 30-foot front setback. So it's got a setback of about 20 feet from the front property line. And this is almost identical to the location of the existing house and how far it is from the street. As you can see, despite the fact that that it will be closer to the front property line. They still are meeting our minimum parking requirements. There'll be a 2-car wide driveway on the south side of the house coming in off North Maple Street. Mr. Callow intends to build back with the same design of the house that he built on North Spring Street and came before the board for variances for a year or two ago. This will be the same house plan, and as you can see, it is constructed of hardy board siding. Staff believes that the subject lot is a good candidate for a front setback variance, even though a house could be built on this lot without any setback variances. As I mentioned, the Community Development Department makes a concerted effort to build in harmony with the existing single-family neighborhood, the homes in those neighborhoods, and they are attempting to do so once again. In addition, the request is consistent with the recommendations of the Manny Avenue Comprehensive Plan, in which this is in the study area. It's in the area that's identified as the Oaklands Mansion Residential District, which recommends as a key design standard reduced front setbacks to better relate homes to the street, and it recommends a minimum front setback of 15 feet and a maximum front setback of 25 feet with parking to the side or to the rear. The applicant proposes a 20-foot front setback, which is consistent with that recommendation of the Manny Avenue Comprehensive Plan. And right now I'll show you some photographs of the property itself. This is the front of the house from North Maple Street. And you can see here is one of the outbuildings that is going to be torn down. That's the side of the house and the current driveway. And you can kind of see the other outbuilding back in that back corner. Kind of difficult to see, but trying to get a glimpse of the distance from the house to the north to the front property line. This is a little bit better angle. This is looking south from the property to the north. You can see it's approximately the same distance from the house that's in question, which is this house right here. And this is looking from the subject property down at the houses to the south. And this is the house that is to the south, and you can see the distance to the front property line pretty much mirrors the distance from the house at 1014, which we are considering. If the board approves this application, staff recommends the following condition. A surveyor will be required to help lay out the footing of the building, and a surveyor's certification must be provided that the building is in compliance with the action of the BZA as well as all other setback requirements. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them before or after the public hearing, and Mr. Callow is in attendance as well if you have any questions for him.
All right, thank you, Mr. Bromley. Questions for Mr. Bromley? All right, Mr. Callow, anything you'd like to add to the application?
Just one small, the picture he showed you was not the North Spring Street house. That was our Grantland Avenue house. But this will be the 5th time we built this plan. It also was the house that on Kerr Avenue that you might have seen in the paper that was the 100th Habitat house. And then we're also getting ready to build this house plan on Monroe Street, which did not require BZA approval. We were able to hit the setbacks on that one.
Will that fence, I'm just curious, I'd go up and down that.
We're going to try and save it.
Yeah.
It's just like all the, you may remember a project we did on Scales Street a number of years ago, and there was an eagle in the front gable of the house, and the homeowner's father had built that and installed that on the old house, and when we drew the new plans, we said that's part of the character of the neighborhood. We want that in the house plan, and it's on the new house. So that's that's the way we approach our projects.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we'll, if we can save that fence, we intend to do so.
Yeah, it's pretty unique, I think.
That whole lot is, and everything on it is unique. But those both of the outbuildings have been non-conforming uses for a long time, so we'll clean up some problems there, and it's going to make it a better lot for everybody concerned.
Okay. Any questions for Mr. Callow?
I don't have any questions, but always a comment that I look at the houses you all redo, and it adds so much to the community. And I really appreciate you and your committee.
I think we all agree with that. All right. Thank you, Mr. Callow. At this time, we'll go ahead and conduct a public hearing. Anyone present wishing to speak for or against the application, if you would, please come forward. And seeing none, we'll declare the public hearing closed and open the floor for further discussions or motion.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to approve the variance request, of course, with the staff's comments for the conditions that have been set.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, Mr. Callow, that application has been approved. Thank you. Thank you. Good to see you. All right, we'll now consider application Z11037 by Ms. Frida Hennessy, requesting a 19.17-foot variance of the minimum required 35-foot front setback. This is for an existing attached accessory structure in a residential single-family zone for property located at 2326 Gold Valley Drive. Mr. Blomley, if you would review that one for us, please.
Be glad to. Thank you, Chairman Rogers. The subject property is located in the Woodchase subdivision on Gold Valley Drive. The Woodchase subdivision is located just to the east of North Rutherford Boulevard, across the street from Stratford Hall. The property is zoned RS10, and the subdivision is developed with single-family residential homes. Ms. Hennessy's property is located at the southwest corner of Gold Valley Drive and Pearl Knob Court. This particular application kind of came to our attention from, began with Robert Lewis in our office. He had, I believe, received a complaint about a setback encroachment of the existing attached carport. And so you can see that in the agenda materials that Mr. Lewis's letter about the carport notifying Ms. Hennessy that it appeared to be in violation. Ms. Hennessy decided to apply to the Board of Zoning Appeals for a variance in order to keep the carport in its current location. She hired a surveyor to do a survey of the property to determine exactly how much it encroached into that setback. And that's where we get the 19.17-foot variance of the minimum required 35-foot front setback, because it's 15.83 feet off of the front setback along Pearl Knob Court. Now, as you will recall, corner lots in single-family residential districts have 2 front lot lines and 2 side lot lines, and as such have 2 corresponding front setbacks and 2 corresponding side setbacks. The encroachment is into the front setback along Pearl Knob Court and not the front setback along Gold Valley Drive. If we could, I appreciate putting that up. Thank you. There is the house right there, and it's difficult to see because the top of the carport is white, but there is the encroachment right there. And I've got a aerial photo that's zoomed in a little bit more. I'm going to put that up for you. You can see there is the subject carport right there, and it's 15.83 feet off of the front property line along Pearl Knob Court at its closest point. Accessory structures that are either attached to the house or are less than 5 feet from the house are considered essentially as part of the principal structure and have to adhere to the same setbacks as the principal structure. There's a 35-foot minimum front building setback in the RS10 zoning district, And since this is considered an attached accessory structure, it has to meet that 35-foot minimum front setback. So as I mentioned, Ms. Hennessy has made an application to the Board of Zoning Appeals to keep that carport in its existing location. And included in your agenda materials is a survey of the property showing that exact dimension to the property line along Pearl Knob Court. And you can see it's 15.83 feet off of that front property line. According to the applicant, the carport was constructed in April of 2007. You'll notice in Mr. Lewis's letter to Ms. Hennessy, he determined by researching this matter that no building permit had been obtained by either Ms. Hennessy or by her contractor prior to the construction of that carport on her property. The applicant states that the purpose of the carport is to protect her vehicles from the elements, and the applicant has provided her justification for the variance in her letter to the board. Among the reasons she feels that the variance request is warranted is that there is really no other logical place on the subject property where the carport could be constructed and still meet the minimum setback requirements. Now I'll show you some photographs of the subject property. And this is looking at the subject property from Gold Valley Drive. And there's the carport in question right there. This kind of better shows the relationship of the carport to this Pearl Knob Court, which is the side street. Just as a point of information, we did discuss the carport location with our traffic engineer, Mr. Balachandra, and he said that there are no traffic sight distance issues with the carport being at its present location. This is looking at the carport from Pearl Knob Court. Just another view of the carport there. This is looking at the carport from the south. There's some vegetation that gets in the way of the view of the carport there. And now just some pictures of the surrounding area. This is the house directly to the south of the carport. This is kind of in the bulb of the cul-de-sac. This is the house directly across Pearl Knob Court. And this is the house directly directly across of Gold Valley Drive. If you grant this request, the normal condition about having a surveyor lay out the structure and provide certification would not be necessary, obviously, because the carport is already in place, and we already know the existing dimensions of the carport to the property line along Pearl Knob Court. With that being said, I'll be happy to answer any questions before or after the public hearing. Ms. Hennessy is present and available to answer any questions if you would like to ask her any.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Blomley. Questions for Mr. Blomley?
The current side setback and rear would be 10 feet? Is that what's
That's
typically
correct.
there? If that side didn't have the court there, it would be a 10-foot
That's correct.
setback? Okay.
Yeah, 35 feet along the two front property lines and 10 feet along the two side property
Okay.
lines.
Is that house currently listed for sale?
Yes.
It looks like there's maybe a realtor sign on one of these pictures.
Yes. As a matter of fact, it was my understanding that I'd been contacted by both the buyer's realtor and by Ms. Hennessy's realtor, and I believe they're trying to get this issue resolved before they move forward with any closings.
Is there a contract on the house that's contingency on it?
I'll let Ms. Hennessy answer that question.
Okay. And clearly, if you construct something like this, a building permit is required?
That's correct.
Okay. All right. Other questions? All right. Thank you, Mr. Blomley. And I'm sorry, who's here on behalf of the applicant?
Ms. Hennessy is here.
Hennessy, okay. Ms. Hennessy, anything you'd like to add to the application?
At the time I had it.
I'll tell you what, if you can come forward to the podium and make your comments, that way we can catch them.
At the time I had it put up, I didn't know you had to have a permit. And evidently, the person that put it up, contractor, didn't know that, I had to have one either. So, and it's been there 4 years, and I get the letter saying, one way or the other. So that's where I stand at.
Yeah, that's where I kind of fall out with it, is that I wouldn't, I had to ask Mr. Blomley, is this something you had to have a permit for? I didn't know that for sure, and I'm not surprised that you didn't know it.
Right, it being open.
But a contractor should know it. The guy that's in the business that does this day in and day out absolutely should know that.
Well, I've got the paper and everything where, I bought the person
Yeah.
I bought it from and everything.
Yeah, and I'm not fussing at you.
Right.
If your contractor was here,
Right.
he would. I think he'd have a lot to answer for.
Right.
Okay, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Any questions for Ms. Hennessy?
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. All right, at this time, we'll conduct a public hearing. Anyone present wishing to speak for or against the application, if you would please come forward. All right, and seeing none, we'll declare the public hearing closed and open the floor for further discussions or motion.
I didn't catch the real estate sign there in the pictures. We had one of these a couple of months ago, I think the same set of circumstances that we approved, and the traffic engineer looked at it and said, okay, so my feeling was going to go ahead and allow it. I don't know if the rest of you guys were thinking if that complicates it or plays into a part with it. We're probably getting ready to change hands.
I know we've run into this before, and specifically I'm thinking, I don't know if you were here yet, Mr. Blomley, but an issue that was in the Jones Boulevard area where somebody had built one off the front of their house, and you're looking down the street, and it was just a straight shot except one carport stuck straight out, and that actually, I think it was a garage maybe. It was a little more involved than what this was. And we rejected that application because it was not consistent. The applicant hadn't proven that it was, in conformity and consistent with the surrounding and adjacent property. That's the problem I have with it today, is that in looking around at the other properties there in the cul-de-sac and the aerial view, I don't see any other structures like that in the neighborhood, and I haven't heard any real justification for this to allow this. I think if this had come to us before it was built, I'd be of the same opinion. There's no justification to allow it. It being it really sticks out, and so. I'm going to struggle with this one, I think, and I don't know. I don't know what will happen, but if for some reason it gets rejected, I think you might want to talk to your contractor about this.
I don't remember the amount of the variance from the one on Sulphur Springs down from 6 months or so ago, 8 months or so ago, was the same sort of thing. I believe it was a corner lot, a cul-de-sac. He had converted his garage to living space.
That was in July. I think it was about a year ago this month. It was in the corner of Sulphur Springs and Sulphur Springs and Ravenwood in, I think, July of 2010. And it was an open carport on the side street, which was Ravenwood. I think that's the one that you're referring to, Mr. Young.
Mm-hmm. I remember having the same aesthetics issues and setback issues, and if it was a side yard, it would have been a different set of circumstances. So.
And that one was approved by the Board of Zoning Appeals.
I remember that one, but it seemed like it was coming off of a garage and it was sort of down, if that's the one I'm thinking about. It really didn't just stick right out as bad to me.
Yeah, I remember that one too, and I think I voted in favor of that. And you're right, it's very similarly situated, but for some reason I don't remember the details of that, but it wasn't as...
I remember, my recollection was similar. And, you may be interested in moving on. Since we passed that one, I'm thinking, well, I'll be consistent, and then you guys determine how you guys want to feel if we're ready for a vote. I'll make sure that we approve the variance, and there's no comments on that. So,
All right, we have a motion. Is there a second?
I'm sorry. I just, it continues to happen, and I think somewhere we just got to draw the line. I'm just not in favor of it.
Okay, well then that motion is going to fail for a second. We don't need to make a motion to reject the application, do we? Or do we?
I don't believe so. If it's if there's not a motion to grant it, it is denied. And if there's not a motion that's passed to grant it, it would be denied.
Okay.
would it be cleaner if they made a motion to deny it?
It would not be inappropriate for a motion to deny it.
Okay.
I'll make a motion to deny it.
Is there a second? And I'll second that. All right, we have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Okay. The application, Ms. Hennessy, was denied. All right, so we'll move on to application Z11038 by Mr. Hanson Duke. And Mr. Duke is making the following requests for property located at 120 Porter Street in a light industrial zone. First, a parking variance to allow for 3 fewer parking spaces than the minimum 9 that are required for the proposed use. Second, a 2-foot variance of the minimum required 5-foot rear perimeter planting yard width along the southern property line. And finally, a 4-foot variance of the minimum required 5-foot side perimeter planting yard width along the western property line. Mr. Blomley, if you'd review that one for us, please.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers. The subject property should look familiar to you. We saw a variance request, or several variance requests on this property back in 2008. It's a very small, narrow lot that sits on the corner of Porter Street and Steel Tech Drive. Steel Tech Drive runs off of South Rutherford Boulevard, directly in front of Steel Technologies plant, which is south of South Rutherford Boulevard and east of South Church Street. And I'll show you the photograph on the aerial photograph here on the overhead. You see here, this was in spring of 2010. There's an existing single-family structure on that property. Since that time, and the property is zoned LI, light industrial. Since that time, the applicants had purchased the property and have made some improvements on the property. They're no longer using the structure as a single-family residence. They have come in and made some side improvements, namely they're using the single-family structure as their business office, and they have gravelled the parking lot, or gravelled the backyard for parking. They own and operate a moving and storage business, and there's no storage that takes place on site, but they do run their business out of the office portion of their business out of the residence, or out of the residential structure, and they park their moving vehicles behind the residential structure in the parking lot. Mr. Lewis has been busy. He sent the applicants a letter as well, notifying them that they had made improvements on the property without site plan approval. And once again, you can find a letter from Mr. Lewis to the applicants notifying them that their property was in violation. The applicants then hired Huddleston Steel Engineering to draw a site plan for them. And because the property is so small, in order to make the site plan work, they have come before you today with 3 variance requests. And they have met with the planning staff several times. They've submitted their site plan, and the plan that they submit today is kind of the product of working with the planning staff to come up with some kind of solution for this very, very small lot, which I believe is 0.16 acres. The variances that were approved in 2008 don't apply because that was for a different site plan that was submitted. The former owner of the property sought to tear down his speculative plan, I should say, was to tear down the existing residential structure and rebuild an office/warehouse building with parking in front of it along Porter Street. The applicants, as I mentioned, seek to utilize the existing structure and kind of retrofit the lot so that they will use that existing structure as their business office. They will need to get appropriate permits from the Building and Codes Department in order to change the occupancy of that structure, because right now the improvements haven't been made on the inside of the structure to meet code for a commercial building. And what you have before you is the original site plan that was submitted with the application. This has changed a little bit. The large size copy that you have in front of you there have been some modifications made to it. The applicants have requested 3 variances. The first that I'll go over with you is a parking variance. Based on the formula that's required for the applicant's use, it requires a total of 9 parking spaces, and the parking formula is 1.5 spaces per employee and 1 space per business vehicle. And the information that they've submitted is that there will be 3 business vehicles, i.e. 3 moving trucks. And so you can see on the site plan here they have 3 oversized parking spaces for their moving trucks that would back directly out onto Steel Tech Drive. And then in addition to that, they're showing 4 regular parking spaces, 1 here right next to where the moving trucks are, 2 here, and one of the changes that you'll see that I'll go over with you in just a moment is that this space, which is shown to be a handicap space on the original plan, is no longer shown to be a handicap space. It's shown to be a regular parking space. And then there's 1 additional parking space in front of the building as well. So they've made a request for a 3-space parking variance. So rather than have 6 parking spaces as they would be required for their employees, they're just showing 4 parking spaces. It was uncertain at the time they submitted their application whether they would need a 3-space variance or a 2-space variance. So they submitted it as a 3-space variance, and we've advertised it as a 3-space variance. Since that time, the applicant has submitted a letter to Mr. Gary Whitaker, the Building and Codes Director, requesting permission to eliminate the handicap parking space. And the way that our Building and Codes Department grants an exemption to the requirement for a handicap parking space is if the building is not intended to be open to the public. And Mr. Duke and Mr. Huddleston, who has represented Mr. Duke through this process, have stated in their letter that the building will not be open to the public. It will be purely for employees. And another thing that they have put in writing is that there will be no sign on the premises, which would, and that's one of Mr. Whitaker's requirements whenever he's going to grant an exemption for a handicap space, is that there's no sign attracting people to come in, or attracting the public to come in to the location. So because he's granted the exemption for them to not have that handicap parking space, they actually have 4 regular spaces now in addition to the 3 oversized business vehicle spaces, which leaves them 2 spaces short of the minimum required amount. Mr. Huddleston, in his letter representing Mr. Duke, provides his justification for the parking variance. He said that there is usually only 1 employee actually working in the office, but sometimes there are 2 at one time. He also states that the moving truck drivers usually carpool to the office or use public transit. Also, as stated earlier, the office will not be open to the public. One thing, though, that I'll mention, and I'll show this to you in the photographs, is that the planning staff has been to the site twice since the application was filed. During the first visit, there were 6 personal vehicles and 1 moving truck. One of the owners indicated to staff that one of the 6 vehicles was his personal vehicle and that it was inoperable and that it would be moved off the property in pretty short order. In addition, he said that in the future, the number of personal vehicles driven to the site by his workers will correspond with the actual number of spaces that are on site. The second time staff visited the site, there were only 2 personal vehicles, but there were 4 of the oversized moving trucks. The other owner of the business indicated that one of the 4 moving trucks on site that day was going to be permanently removed from the property, so that in the future the number of moving trucks on site will also correspond with the number of oversized business vehicles shown on the plans, which is 3. If the board approves the parking variance request, staff recommends the following condition. The Planning Commission or the planning staff at the discretion of the planning director must grant site plan approval for the proposed development. And now on to the landscape variances. Because the property is less than 1 acre, 5-foot perimeter landscape yards are required on all 4 sides of the property. The applicant is requesting a 4-foot variance along the western property line and a 2-foot variance along the southern property line. This would result in a 1-foot landscape yard along the western property line and a 3-foot landscape yard along the southern property line. There's an existing tree line along the western property line. The applicant has committed to preserving as much of this tree line as possible. However, it's uncertain at this point how many of those trees are actually on the applicant's property, whether they're right on the property line or just over the property line or just on his property. The applicant provides his justification for the landscape variances in his letter to the board. He cites the narrowness and small size of the lot compared to other lots that are zoned and used for industrial purposes. He also states that the lot was created long before the city's current zoning and landscaping regulations were in place. Based on research that planning staff did in 2008 for the previous application, it appears that this area was subdivided for single-family residential uses in the 1940s. And according to the property assessor's website, the residential structure on the property was constructed in 1945. If the board approves the landscape variance request, staff recommends the following conditions. The Planning Commission or the planning staff at the discretion of the planning director must grant site plan approval for the proposed development. In addition, the landscape plan will be subject to the final review and approval of the city horticulturist. Number 2, the landscape plan must demonstrate an equivalent number of plantings to what would be required by ordinance without landscape variances. If this cannot be demonstrated, then the applicant must make a commitment to the city's tree bank in accordance with the landscape ordinance, which is Section 27 of the Murfreesboro zoning ordinance. With that being said, I'll be happy to answer any questions. Mr. Duke is in attendance, I believe, to... I've never met Mr. Duke. I've met his mother, but he is in attendance to answer any questions that the board has. In addition, Mr. Lewis is in attendance, and he wrote the letter to Mr. Duke initially, and I'll be happy to answer any questions also, either before or after the public hearing.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Blomley. Questions for Mr. Blomley?
And if you'd like, I can show you those photographs as well.
Okay.
This is the front of the subject structure as it faces Porter Street. This is looking across Steel Tech Drive at the subject property. And this was on my first visit to the subject property. And this is the gravel that was put in without site plan approval, and there's the tree line along the western property line that they would attempt to save. As I mentioned on that first day, there were 6 personal vehicles on the subject property, which is more than the number of spaces that they would have. This is looking at the property to the south. That's an abandoned house that is directly to the south of the subject property. It's also zoned light industrial. This is looking directly to the north. There's a vacant lot right on the other corner of Porter and Steel Tech. And this is the Steel Technologies plant directly across Steel Tech Drive from the subject property. And as I mentioned on my second trip to the subject property to put the signs up, there were 4 of the moving trucks, and so you can see what the moving trucks look like. I believe that Mrs. Duke said that this yellow truck was the one that was going to be, and Mr. Duke just confirmed that it's already gone. And just to kind of get you a good glimpse of the size of the trucks that will be parking in those oversized spaces. And just kind of wanted to get you a glimpse of that tree line along the western property line. And that's all the photographs that I have for this one.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Blomley. Questions, Mr. Blomley? All right. Mr. Duke, thank you, Mr. Blomley. Mr. Duke, anything you'd like to add to the application?
Yes, sir. Board and everything. I've already removed the other personal vehicle that was broke down. Went ahead and had it towed to the shop. It's gone. The yellow truck's gone. You know, we've cleaned everything up. And in part, I kind of have a 3-step plan of the business. I want to pay this property off within the next 4 to 5 years, and then buy one of the lots surrounding it, and then go through another process of getting a warehouse built to have more parking in a warehouse, and do the whole. But I want to do it in 3 steps, to where I buy one property, buy the other property, and then buy the structure itself. But that would be over a course of a period of time. I don't want to do it all at once because I don't want to finance it.
Okay. Any questions?
But that's about it. Other than that, we'll comply with all the landscaping regulations and everything.
All right. Any questions for Mr. Duke? All right. Thank you, sir.
All right. Thank you.
At this time, we'll go ahead and conduct a public hearing. Anyone present wishing to speak for or against the application, if you would, please come forward. And seeing none, we'll declare the public hearing closed and open the floor for further discussions or motion.
And just as a reminder, each of the 3 variances can be taken in separate motions.
Okay. I guess then we need to consider first the parking variance request to allow 3 fewer parking spaces than the minimum 9 that are required.
I'll make a motion to approve the variance, subject to the staff comments.
Could I get a clarification? Would that be for the 3-space variance, or would that be for a reduced 2-space variance, based on the fact that the handicap space was given an exemption from the Building and Codes Director?
I was going on the 3 fewer parking spaces.
Okay. So the motion is for it as it was submitted?
Correct.
Okay.
But what you're saying, Matt, is that you can't, they don't need 3, they only need 2, because they gave up the handicap and that created that extra space.
Correct.
Okay.
The desire always is there for 2. That's all that we need to grant.
Based on the Building and Codes Director's exemption, then at this point there are just 2 spaces deficient
Okay.
from what is required by ordinance.
And I'll amend my motion to the 2 fewer parking spaces. It's, of course, subject to the staff comments.
Thank you for the clarification.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we'll now move to the 2-foot variance request from the minimum required 5-foot rear perimeter planting yard width.
I'll make a motion to approve as written, of course, with the conditions set by the staff being met.
No second?
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, and we'll finish up with the 4-foot variance request for the minimum required 5-foot side perimeter planting yard width.
I'll make a motion to approve the 4-foot variance, subject to staff comments.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, Mr. Duke, you have your variance requests. All right, we'll now continue on with special use permits and variance requests. We've got 3 to consider from Goodwill Industries of Middle Tennessee. The first is application Z11039, 4 for Goodwill. First one is Z11039 by Ms. Jennifer Khalifa for Goodwill Industries of Middle Tennessee, requesting a special use permit in order to operate a temporary mobile recycling center in a commercial highway zone, and this is for property located at 710 Memorial Boulevard, which I believe is in front of the Murfreesboro Athletic Club, and an 8-foot variance to the requirement that no receptacle shall exceed 40 feet in length. Mr. Blumley, if you'd review that one for us, please.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Chairman Rogers. Ms. Khalifa has made a special use permit request for a 12-month extension on her existing location, and this is actually the first of 4 requests that she has made for the 4 existing locations that Goodwill has their donation trailers. As you know, we classified the donation trailers as temporary mobile recycling centers, which by ordinance can only be approved for 12 months at a time. So Ms. Khalifa is making a request for a 12-month extension to that, which would be from August 1st, 2011 through July 31st, 2012. And then she would if she desired to keep these 4 locations, she would make application again next July for the same locations. I'll show you the aerial photograph right now, and I'll try to keep this brief because all 4 locations, to my knowledge, we have not received any complaints about. Each time that I go by these 4 locations, they are kept in a neat and tidy manner, and as I mentioned, to my knowledge, we've never had any complaints. So they're requesting a special use permit for an additional 12 months and a variance to that maximum 40-foot length of the receptacle. They use standard 48-foot trailers for all their locations, and so in order for them to be able to continue using the standard 48-foot trailers, they have made a variance request for each of these 4 locations. With that being said, I'll be happy to answer any questions. If the special use permit is approved, staff recommends the following conditions, and these will be the same conditions for all 4, so I'll just read them one time. The semi-trailer shall not be located within a driveway aisle, and all parts of the semi-trailer shall comply with the minimum 42-foot front setback requirement in the CH zoning district. Ms. Khalifa is here if you have any questions, and please remember that each of these will need to be taken in separate motions.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Blomley. Questions for Mr. Blomley? All right. Thank you, sir. Ms. Khalifa, anything you'd like to add to the application? Then this time we'll conduct a public hearing. Anyone present wishing to speak for or against the application, if you would, please come forward. And seeing none, we'll declare the public hearing closed and open the floor for further discussions or motion. And I think we'll consider first the special use permit request, and then take second the variance request.
I'll make a motion to approve the application for the special use permit and variance request. Can we do them together, or do we have to do it separately?
Yes, separate.
You have to do them separate? Okay. Then I'll make a motion to approve the special use permit.
Subject to staff comment.
Yes, subject to staff comment.
All right.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, and then we'll next consider the 8-foot variance request.
Make a motion to approve the variance request, subject to the staff comments.
I'll second.
Motion and a second. Further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, Ms. Khalifa, you have the application for the Memorial Boulevard location has been approved. We'll now consider application Z11040 by Ms. Jennifer Khalifa for Goodwill, requesting a special use permit in order to operate a temporary mobile recycling center in a commercial highway zone, and this is for property located at 1825 Old Fort Parkway. Also, again, the 8-foot variance to the requirement that no receptacle shall exceed 40 feet in length. And Mr. Blomley, if you'd review that one for us, please.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Chairman Rogers. This is located in the Lowe's parking lot. If we could pull the aerial photograph up. You'll see there is the trailer right there. This is another site that we have had no complaints about, and the applicant is seeking the 12-month renewal for the same time frame, and the same conditions are recommended by staff. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
All right, thank you, Mr. Blomley. Questions for Mr. Blomley? All right, Ms. Khalifa, anything you'd like to add to this one? Quiet over there. This is your chance. At this time, we'll conduct a public hearing. Anyone present wishing to speak for or against the application? And seeing none, we'll declare the public hearing closed and open the floor for further discussions or motion. And again, we'll consider the special use permit request first.
I'll make a motion to approve the special use permit, subject to the staff comments.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, then we'll consider the 8-foot variance request.
Make a motion to approve the 8-foot variance request, subject to the staff comments.
I'll second.
A motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Mr. Young, Ms. Mosby up here working hard, making motions and seconds. All right, Ms. Khalifa, the application there for Old Fort Parkway has been approved. We'll now consider application Z11041 by Ms. Jennifer Khalifa for Goodwill, making the following requests for property located at 3060 South Church Street in a commercial highway zone. First, a special use permit in order to operate a temporary mobile recycling center. Next, in the 8-foot variance to the requirement that no receptacle shall exceed 40 feet in length. And also a 250-foot variance to the requirement that no receptacle shall be located closer than 300 feet from a residentially zoned property. Mr. Blomley, if you'd review that one for us, please.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers. I believe this is the third year that Ms. Khalifa has made application for this location. This is in the parking lot of the Food Lion Shopping Center on the corner of Barfield Crescent Road and South Church Street. The only thing that's different about this request, as you noted, that she does have a request from the separation requirement. Our zoning ordinance requires a minimum separation of 300 feet from the receptacle to residentially zoned property. And if you can see on the aerial photograph, the property here that's developed as the Barfield Commons condo development is only about, the property line there is only about 50 feet from the donation trailer. We've never had any complaints from any of the, to my knowledge, from any of the residents of Barfield Commons. The ones in direct proximity to the receptacle receive notice each year, and we post a sign. Actually, one of the things that I do is for the folks that walk to the food line from Barfield Commons, I actually post a sign right here along the walkway, in addition to the sign up here along South Church Street. And to my knowledge, we have not had any complaints about this receptacle, despite the fact that it is only located about 50 feet from property that's zoned residential. I believe it's actually zoned RM16, which permits a multifamily zone that permits a condo complex like Barkfield Commons. With that being said, I'll be happy to answer any questions, and the two recommended conditions of approval are the same, and this will need to be taken in 3 separate motions.
All right, thank you, Mr. Blomley. Ms. Khalifa, anything you'd like to add to this application? All right, then at this time we'll conduct a public hearing. Anyone present wishing to speak for or against the application, if you would please come forward. And seeing none, we'll declare the public hearing closed and open the floor for 3 motions. We'll open the floor for a motion addressing one of 3 issues. The first, special use permit in order to operate a temporary mobile recycling center.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to approve, subject to the staff's comments.
Second.
Motion and a second. Further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we'll now consider the 8-foot variance request for the trailer.
Make a motion to approve the 8-foot variance, subject to the staff comments.
I'll second.
Motion and second. Further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
And finally, the 250-foot variance for the receptacle.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to approve, subject to staff comments.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, Ms. Khalifa, the application there for the South Church Street trailer has been approved. And last, we'll consider application Z11042 by Ms. Jennifer Khalifa for Goodwill, making the following request for property located at 1114 Mercury Boulevard in a commercial highway zone. And again, we have 3 components. First, a special use permit in order to operate the temporary mobile recycling center. Second, the 8-foot variance request that no receptacle shall exceed 40 feet in length. And finally, a 175-foot variance to the requirement that no receptacle be located closer than 300 feet from residentially zoned property. Mr. Blomley.
All right, thank you, Chairman Rogers. This property is located in the, or this request is for the Mercury Plaza Shopping Center. The applicant had this site approved for the first time last year, and to my knowledge, we have received no complaints about this location as well. The aerial photograph was actually taken before the trailer was put out there. I think the photograph was taken in early May of 2010, and the trailer didn't go out there until August. But it's put right here in this first row of parking spaces. And as you can see, directly across the street is property that is zoned residential. The zoning boundary is actually along the center line of Mercury Boulevard. But it's actually, even though it's 125 feet to the actual zoning boundary, I believe it's more in the order of 175 feet to the actual property line of the nearest property zoned residentially. As you can see that most of the business or most of the properties along Mercury Boulevard are commercial, but the one side of I believe it's 2nd Avenue, the west side of 2nd Avenue is zoned residentially, and it still has single-family residences on it. With that being said, the applicant is making an identical application as last year. The special use permit, the 8-foot variance, and the 175-foot variance to the 300-foot separation from residentially zoned property. As I mentioned, I have not received any complaints, and we would make the recommendation, or make the recommendation of the 2 staff comments for the special use permit. If the board has any questions regarding this application, I'll be happy to answer them. It's identical as the one that was approved last year.
All right, thank you, Mr. Blomley. Questions for Mr. Blomley? All right. Ms. Khalifa, anything you'd like to add to this one? It's your last chance. You can come up and read from the phone book if you want to. All right. We'll go ahead and declare the public hearing open, then. Anyone present wishing to speak for or against this application? If not, we'll declare the public hearing closed and open the floor for motions. We'll first consider the special use permit request.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to approve the special use permit, subject to the staff's comments and conditions.
No second?
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we'll move on now to the 8-foot variance request for the trailer.
A motion to approve the 8-foot variance, subject to the staff comments.
A second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And finally, the 175-foot variance request.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to approve the 175-foot variance, subject to the staff's comments.
No second?
Motion and a second. Further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, Ms. Khalifa, you have that application for the Mercury Boulevard location has been approved as well. Thank you for coming in today. Always good to see you. All right, we'll now consider staff reports and other business.
Mr. Chairman, I think Mr. Ives has something that he would like to go over, and I may chime in with a couple of comments as well after he gets done.
All right.
Chairman Rogers, the Board of Zoning Appeals is getting a new responsibility. We recently amended our weeds and grass ordinance, which is part of our something that's enforced by the Building and Codes Department. We have had for many years a requirement that weeds and grass be mowed to a certain level within the city limits. It can vary based on the size of the tract, and with large tracts there needs to be a mowed corridor adjacent to other, particularly other residential properties. About a year ago, I guess, maybe two by now, we enacted some water quality protection ordinances, and part of the water quality protection plan is that certain areas within the city should not be mowed, but should be left natural so that the vegetation operates as a filter to the rainwater that crosses. We had came up with such a situation that to some extent our weeds and grass ordinance and our water quality control ordinance were in conflict. So we've amended the weeds and grass ordinance to make those compatible. And one of the things that we added to that, for instance, in the compatibility, you've probably noticed in front of the new hospital along Medical Center Parkway, there are some water retention areas that have native plants that are water and dry tolerant. And that area is not mowed. The top of the bank is mowed, but the bottom of it is not. That's part of the approved water quality protection zone, but it would be in conflict with our weeds and grass ordinance. So that conflict has been eliminated. But, and as I started to say, one of the things we've added now is for a landowner to request a variance that will allow the landowner to maintain or to refrain from mowing certain areas. The process has been set up that if a landowner wants to do that, they make an application through building codes and through water and sewer department, both, I believe, and it's kind of in line with the normal request. They've got to describe what they're doing and why they're wanting to do it in the area. The notices are posted to, like with other variance requests, and if a neighboring owner objects, then there will be a hearing, public hearing before the Board of Zoning Appeals to consider the variance. We handed two documents. One, the first 2 pages that Mr. Blomley handed out at the beginning of the meeting, is the actual amendment. It's got ordinance 11023 at the top of the page. On the second page, toward the middle of number 5, references the public hearing to be held by the Board of Zoning Appeals. I wanted you to, that kind of condenses what will be primarily your concern when any of these variances come in. I put the whole ordinance there, the amending ordinance, so you can, if you read through the whereas clauses, it will give you the rationale and the basis for making these amendments. And again, Section 5, subsection 5 at in the second page describes the variance process for a landowner. I had also handed out to you about a 5-page document which has the entirety of our weeds and refuse section of the city code, and that's section 1450 through 14-58. The provisions, this is now as amended, and the provisions here, that you'll be dealing with show up in section 14-53. I wanted you to have the whole section just so that you can become generally familiar with the weeds and refuse, weeds and grass provisions of our city code, and have a better understanding of that when you get the opportunity to hear one of the variance requests. I'm not sure which property it is, but I've been told that there's some reason to think that a variance request will be coming in the near future, quite possibly for our next meeting. So we wanted to introduce this to you ahead, let you take a look at it. Of course, you're free to call us, either Mr. Blomley or me at any time. If you look at this, have questions, we'd be happy to talk with you about it. And we may have some further, Mr. Blomley may have a few more comments now, and we may have a few more things at the start of the process when a variance request comes in.
One of the things that I wanted to add, and one of the reasons why Ms. Green and Mr. Jones from our Building and Codes Department were here today was to kind of familiarize themselves with the Board of Zoning Appeals. Ms. Green is the Administrative Support Specialist in the Building and Codes Department who takes the property maintenance violation complaints. And one of the property maintenance violation complaints that she logs and takes in is our weeds and grass complaints. So when the process of someone filing for an exemption starts, it will start with her at the Building and Codes Department. She'll be kind of how Brenda, when we get a zoning variance application, Brenda logs everything in and processes the application. Ms. Green will do the same thing at the Building and Codes Department. Mr. Jones is one of the property maintenance inspectors who will go out to the property to verify compliance or non-compliance. So the process will start with the Building and Codes Department. Some of the exemption requests will get to the public hearing stage at the Board of Zoning Appeals. Some of them probably will not get to that stage because someone may choose to withdraw the exemption request if they see that a neighboring landowner objects. They may not wish to continue their application for a public hearing. But some of the exemption requests may very well get to the point of coming to the Board of Zoning Appeals for a public hearing. So we wanted to make sure that you had this information and that you could read up on it, and in the meantime, before any future meetings, if you had any questions, to let us know, because as Mr. Ives said, we may get these requests in the future, and especially these are kind of this is kind of a prevalent issue during the spring and summer months. It's not always that prevalent during the winter months, but this time of year, our Building Codes Property Maintenance Division stays very busy with weeds and grass complaints, as you can imagine.
Okay. Do I understand then, just generally, broadly speaking, I guess the weed and grass ordinance requires that, quote, small tracts of land be cut and maintained at 12 inches or less. Large tracts of land have to be cut at least 3 times a year, at least twice during a period from March to November.
I believe that's accurate.
Okay. I assume small tracts and large tracts are defined somewhere.
They are, and
I couldn't find it in the weeds and grass ordinance. And then while y'all are looking for that, how many water quality protection areas are there within the city? Are there many, or are there just a handful?
Well, back to your first one, 14-53 capital A on what I handed out to you, the multi-page document, defines small tracts as building lawns, sidewalk neutral strips, walkways, gardens, decorative landscaped areas, and unimproved lots of 2 acres or less.
Okay, good, thank you.
And so large is basically everything else.
Okay.
There are a lot of water quality protection areas, and there will be more. Basically, the bank of every stream, creek, river, pardon me, is now a water quality protection area. In a larger development, there will be retention and detention sites, which will not only be designed to hold water temporarily to reduce flooding downstream, but they will also be required to have plantings and other features that will, to some extent, treat the water. So it's both to hold the water for flood control and erosion control, and also to have as much of the sediment and whatever else comes to sink into the ground rather than to continue to flow down the sidewalks and into the storm drains and ultimately into the Stones River. So all developments that come in, everything over 1 acre will be required to have to at least address water quality protection. And it may be that they don't have to do anything, and it may be that they have to have a buffer that slows the water down, holds it. There'll be a variety of things that are being approved when the site plans come in. And so part of the exemption here, the exemption to the requirement, is that if we have, say, a 5-acre development someplace of an office complex, and if the Planning Commission and Planning and Zoning Engineering departments approve a particular area within that development as a water quality protection area and set the standards for it, then that area will be exempt, or may be exempt anyway, from our weeds and grass ordinance without a variance. But the variances will come in when someone who does not have not a new development, but an existing development that doesn't have a designated water quality protection area, but maybe they want to establish one and do things that would otherwise be in violation of our current weeds and grass ordinance, then it will come to the BZA for consideration of that variance.
Are they judged by the same standards that other variances are judged?
I'm not sure I can answer that.
You know, and then and the ordinance talks about, in terms of exemption, you've mentioned variance. Anyway, I'm just curious.
Yeah, I can't answer that right now.
Okay.
We'll be ready to answer that when one comes in.
Cross that bridge when we get to it. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Any other discussion? All right. Any other?
So odd shape won't have anything to do with it.
Not necessarily. Although if it's an odd shape that makes it impractical to mow it, that would possibly be an issue.
All right. Well, if there's no other matters to come before the board, then we're adjourned.